His names, we need to know about them, how to apply them, ponder the meanings behind them.
New class alert! Sunnahfollowers presents the names of Allah. Please join us every Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard with Sister Samah, streaming on all major platforms, right here, channel Sunnahfollowers.
Because once we say the provider, what comes to our mind is usually materialistic stuff that are essential in our daily life. But we will see through this session and those slides that there is more to it than we understand. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now, God is the provider, right? The Lord of power, the ever mighty. So the universal worry of people, as we all know, no matter the culture is usually that of provision. So we worry whether we will be able to pay our bills at the end of the month. We worry whether we will be able to afford to pay, for example, our child's higher education, or if we will get our next meal, so on and so forth. Being consumed with worry may cause us to forget that God subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually named himself Raqaaq, or the provider, and this has several implications for us, as I just mentioned. Actually, there are two types of risk of provisions. There are two types of provisions, right? So the first is the material kind, of which the effects can be seen, physically, materialistically. So it can be money, it can be any material thing in this world. And the second type is the internal or the moral provision. And this can include the provision of the heart, the emotional sustenance, and even spiritual risk. All right. So the latter provision is considered the nobler of the two because its fruits are everlasting. Still, materialistic provision is not necessarily bad. Indeed, the essence of risk or provision is something that brings benefit and is endowed by God upon us. So how much it benefits us in the hereafter depends on how we use our material risk in this. Which brings us to, again, stressing the fact that the constant provider and takes it upon himself to deliver what he has apportioned to his servants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, there is not a creature that moves on earth whose provision is not his concern. He knows where it lives and its final resting place. It is all there in a clear record, right? So he has kept record of every single thing. So that should actually make us believe in the power of that name. And in case we had any doubt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by the heavens and the earth. He says, in the sky is your sustenance and all that you are promised. وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ. So by the Lord of the heavens and earth, all this is as real as your speaking, right? So again, Allah is stressing that everything that has to do with our provisions, whether in this life or in the next, is all destined. It is all written, and that should actually make our hearts and minds at peace. Now, moving on, the possession or the acquisition of this provision can actually happen in two ways. Now, the first, he has made dependent on our striving. The means are considered as a form of provision as well. So the first type or the first kind of provision or the first way to actually attain them is through striving, right? Exerting the effort. And the second is that which he has written for us independent of our striving. And that is a very important notion. Because if you continue living thinking that whatever God provides you is only the outcome of your effort, then you will always feel this kind of stress. You always feel that you have to keep moving because there is no other source of provision except by your effort. But then, as a Muslim, we need to believe that there are two types of provision. One of them that demands effort and striving, and the other one is bestowed upon us without really the effort, right? So this is, as I said, something that we really have to bear in mind. Again, for example, if you apply for 10 of jobs, different types of jobs, and you get the job that you want, it is God who provides the means, right? The ability to make the applications that lead to that job. So the provision from the job is made dependent. You are taking the means that God himself made available. On the other hand, you may apply for many jobs and perhaps get an offer from a place to which you did not apply. That is a provision written for you, regardless of your striving, and you can be considered a reward for your striving as well, right? So that's just an example to clarify the difference. All right, now, the idea of striving for your provision. Now, there is provision that God has made dependent on our effort, as I said, all right, and as well as the type of effort we put in. So when we do not put the necessary effort, it is as though we are rejecting God's provision. So because the means of sustenance are a form of provision in and of themselves, right? So as we all know, Islam is actually dictating us to exert the effort, to be proactive, to be independent. So that all demands effort in the right path. So rejecting the means is no different to rejecting and dismissing an envelope full of money that arrives in the mail for us that was sent by God. So an envelope full of money and the means to obtain an envelope of money are both provisions. So we must change the way we conceptualize provisions as being only the material result. From that, we move on to the impact of this. Once we recognize that means are also provision, this should cause us to be grateful that we have means to utilize as they are from Allah. While our provision is indeed written, we still need to work for it as though it depended entirely on how hard we try. But in our hearts, we should know that nothing will come to us except what God has written for us. Now, that is an important notion, right? So we do both at parallel at the same time. We do the physical effort, the mental effort required, whereas at the same time, parallel to that, there's this kind of peace, this serenity, this certainty that whatever God has destined will be actually disclosed and will be reflected and embodied in this life. Now, if we broaden our conception of rizq and truly believe that the Raqaaq, or the provider, is the one who provides it, we will never justify seeking prohibited or haram means of living, because God would never make his provision, whether they are the means or the result of those means, illicit. We need to work in whatever way that we can in a manner that befits us as Muslims, knowing that it is God who will provide for us, even if everyone around us is engaging in corruption. So understanding that, one may ask, all right, but I can still, steal money, and I will obtain that money. I will guarantee having that kind of money or that sum of money. So what I'm saying here is that, yes, it is true that you may do actually or seek haram means for living, and you will still be getting money. But the fact is that this money will only serve you as a path to eternal damnation. So you haven't actually won anything. You have actually lost. So the idea of seeing things for what they truly are is really, really important. A Muslim should have this kind of insight, layered concepts, layered vision in life. You don't see superficially, but you see through things. You seek the deeper meaning of things, the deeper meaning of your existence in the first place. All right, now let us take an example, a very vivid example that demonstrates to us the striving of someone who completely trusted in God and in his provision. And that is the Prophet Abraham and his wife Hajar, right? So when the Prophet Abraham left Hajar and her infant son in the desert, Hajar was understandably confused. However, she asked Abraham if God has commanded him to do this. And when he responded in the affirmative, she knew that whatever God decreed would be good, even if sometimes seemed bad at the moment. So this is the first lesson, that she had trust in God's wisdom. But let us pause here for a second. She had trust in his wisdom at the time when all facts, all evidence around her, all right, contradicted that trust. But if you imagine yourself in her place for 1 second, imagine yourself having a newly born baby, right? And the one who should provide for you and the baby is the same person who actually threw you in the middle of nowhere, in the desert, where millions of, possibilities are there that you may not survive even the night, let alone having a newly born, as I said, and being subjected to the heat, being subjected to all types of vicious animals, insects, you name it. And yet, when she asked him, because she believed in the Prophet Abraham as a prophet, not only as her husband, so she asked him one simple question. Is what you're doing a demand from God? Is it decreed by God, or is it your own doing? And when he responded affirmatively, when he said, yes, it is God who decreed this, she completely trusted him. Does that mean that she was smiling and jumping up and down? No, she was still in pain. She was still maybe worried, and that was very clear in the fact that she kept, roaming the place up and down several times, searching for water. So what did she do? She strived. So when her food supplies ran out and it was harder to breastfeed her son, she ran up and down the mounts of Safa and Marwa 7 times, searching for something, anything. She did not really know what she was searching for. She was hoping it would be water, but she would be satisfied with anything. Her trust in God, that he was the provider, the most wise and the most merciful, did not cause her to simply sit down and wait. And that's another very important point, guys, that anyone else would say, all right, if my husband is a prophet and he has actually did what God has asked him to do, then I'm sure that even if I sit there passively doing absolutely nothing, I would trust that God would actually supply us with whatever provisions we need. But that's not the case. She knew that she still had to exert the effort. So after striving, God has rewarded her with, as we all know, the well of Zamzam, which is still running till that day, right? Imagine this. Okay, so from that we can actually deduce 2 very important points. Number 1, that trusting God is doesn't have to come with evidence. It's not like, okay, I can trust that I will be supplied with certain amount of money because I actually have a good job, and it says so in the contract. And that is not a trust in God. The real trust in God happens when we are in the dark, right? When we don't have all the evidence, we don't see everything clearly, and yet we trust. And that is the iman. So as we know, there is Islam and there is iman, faith, right? Faith in the unseen, the unknown. So when all the evidence, all the proofs are actually hidden, that is the real test of our trust in God. And the second thing is that even if we have full trust in God, we still need to exert the effort. All right. That moves on to understanding. This understanding of risk is evident in how those who learned from our beloved Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad behaved. For example, the companion Sayyidina Umar said, "Let not one of you refrain from working for his provision, supplicating to Allah to provide, while he knows that the sky does not rain gold and silk." Right? So it was very clear that one of the very renowned companions, Sayyidina Umar, made it very clear that don't you ever test God. It's not like I would supplicate day and night. I would just pray for him, and I'm sure that God would, for example, supply me with this amount of money without me even moving a finger. Now that is not iman. That is not the faith that I just mentioned. That is like you're putting your God, subhanahu wa ta'ala, into a test, and this is something that is unacceptable by all means, right? So we don't do that. We act upon God's directions, and God has directed that we should strive, we should exert the effort. Another companion, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, when he migrated to Medina without any of his wealth, and he used to be wealthy in Mecca, immediately asked where the market was so that he could work. And these companions were both amongst the most pious and the most those promised paradise. You know that there are 10 companions who were promised paradise, and Abdurrahman ibn Auf was one of them. He was known to be very rich, and he had to leave everything behind him when he migrated from Mecca to Medina. And what did he do? First thing he did was asking the minute he reached Medina, immediately he asked where the market was, and he started his work or his job as in the marketplace. He was a very well-known tradesman, and he was very wealthy. And guess what? He actually was able to make another immense kind of fortune afterwards. So there are two things that we have to consider. Firstly, the Prophet reminds us, do not think of your provision as slow coming, for a servant will never die until he reaches the end of his provision, right? So even if we go through periods of struggle and seemingly restricted sustenance, we should know that all the provision that has been written for us will come. That should make us, at peace at heart. So there is a distinction between the physical effort and the how your heart feels, right? So what we are asked to put our body in motion while keeping our hearts at peace. And the only way for us to do this is by believing that, yes, I am asked as a Muslim to be proactive, to be, the first to move it, to be initiative, to be productive. But at the same time, in my heart, I'm not really clinging for or clinging to those material possessions in themselves, knowing that I will receive whatever God has designed or destined for me. Secondly, we must remember not to look at God's names and attributes separately. Allah is the most wise, and He tells us that we will be tested in this world with both ease and hardship, wealth and poverty, life and death. Remember, we mentioned that several times before in very previous sessions, and I always repeated to myself before repeating it to you that we need to remember what the initial deal is with God subhanahu wa ta'ala. The deal is that we will be here in this world to be tested, and the tests come in two opposite directions. They can come in wealth as well as in poverty. It can come in forms of death and life, in ease and in hardship. So some are tested with few material resources, while others are tested with an abundance of them. That's also a test, right? And how is the latter a test? If we hoard God's provision, this affects our provision in the hereafter. So it may even affect our spiritual provision, as we should always remember that rizq or provision is not limited to the material. All right. Now, thirdly, we need to understand that there are consequences for our actions. God reminds us that if we do not rule with justice, then there will be corruption on earth that affects everyone. Which reminds us that whenever we see corruption, don't point upward. Do not say that this is, how is it that God has allowed it? God has no, he has actually been telling us, reminding us that we need to rule with justice. So any kind of corruption would actually be the result of our own misjudgment or ill deeds. Now, overusing resources, abusing human beings, and hoarding wealth are things that are despised in our religion, and God warns us severely against them. We cannot blame God when collectively we have created a system which goes precisely against the way in which He has ordered us to live. So the test of those with limited means is the hardship in this life, though Ar-Razzaq, the provider, may manifest himself and his provision in ways that we cannot imagine. And the test of those with abundant means is to help and to work to create a system that is more just. Okay. And from that, we understand that spiritual sustenance and its effect on material sustenance, it's just like we strive for material sustenance, so too should we strive for spiritual sustenance. This is through making the effort to attend circles of knowledge, be devoted during our prayer, reflect upon the Quran, and so on. So the same effort, if not more, that some of us put into gaining material provision must be put into gaining spiritual sustenance as well. Because as you all know, we are spiritual beings in human forms. And sooner or later, we will, our material form will cease to exist only for the spiritual one to continue living. Now, but some may question the correlation between our deeds and provision, as many seemingly sinful people appear to receive material risk and a lot of it as well. Yet there is a superficial way of looking at things because provision is of many types. These people may receive their material risk or provisions, but God may deny them their spiritual risk, and this is far worse, right? So risk is not only materialistic. Now comes a very important point, which is what are the ways that we can use to increase our provision? Now, they could be summarized as follows, and these are taken from the Quran as well as from the Hadith. One of those ways is, number one, God consciousness or taqwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and whoever has taqwa of Allah, He will make for him a way out and will provide for him from where he does not expect. So these are two promises granted to those who seek consciousness or taqwa of Allah. Second thing is reliance on God, tawakkul. And whoever relies upon Allah, this is this is a verse from the Quran, and whoever relies upon Allah, then He is sufficient for him. Indeed, Allah will accomplish His purpose. Allah has already set for everything a decreed extent. Right? So there's also this prayer that says, and enjoin prayer upon your family, land, people, and be steadfast therein. We ask you not for provision, we provide for you, and the best overcome is, and the best outcome is for those of righteousness. Right? So that shows how important tawakkul is. And once you have, but again, what is tawakkul? Is it just by sitting there doing absolutely nothing and praying? Answer is absolutely no. The tawakkul is doing the physical part, fulfilling the physical condition, while keeping your heart at rest, feeling this kind of certainty that you are protected by God, that you will be provided with whatever needs through God. So that should make you rest and should make you feel, serene and at peace. That is tawakkul. Thirdly, faith and good deeds. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and those who have believed and done righteous deeds, for them is forgiveness and noble provision. So that's a promise, right? That whatever, the promise is under two conditions: believing in God with ultimate belief. Now, you just mentioned that belief, meaning that you believe at the time of uncertainty, that you believe when you cannot see clearly the full situation, and when you believe in the unknown, right? So when that happens, that then you have fulfilled the first condition. The second condition is and doing the righteous deed, right? If you have both fulfilled, then His promise will also be fulfilled, which is forgiveness and noble provision. The Messenger of Allah said, seek out the vulnerable among you. Verily, you are only given provision and support due to support of the weak. Right? So you can imagine the kinds of support that the Prophet ﷺ is asking us to provide for the weak. Which again reminds us of the political situation we're in these days, how that we are not doing what our Prophet or our Lord has asked us to do, and therefore we are in this, very awkward position, unfortunately. That brings us to the fourth point, which is keeping good relations with family. That's another way of sustaining this kind of provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever would like his rizq to be increased and his life to be extended should uphold the ties of kinship. This point is thankfulness, right? So when your Lord proclaimed, if you are grateful, I will surely increase your provision or your favor, right? So, but if you deny, indeed my punishment is severe. وَلَئِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَظِيمُ. Right? These are the words God subhanahu wa ta'ala promising us that the more grateful, the more thankful we are, the more He would sustain and provide us. Asking forgiveness and repentance, another way of ensuring that kind of rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ask forgiveness of your Lord. Indeed, He is ever perpetual forgiver. He will send rain from the sky upon you in continuing showers and give you increase in wealth and children and provide for you gardens and provide for you rivers. All right. This is another way of, evoking this kind of sustenance and provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Seventh point is charity. Now, the more you give, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also give back to you. So Allah says, who is it that would loan Allah a goodly loan so He may multiply for him many times over? And from that, we move on to the 8th and the 9th ways of maintaining rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The eighth is reciting Quran. So imagine the Prophet ﷺ said, the house in which Quran is recited is increased in good, and the house in which the Quran is not recited is decreased in good. So the good here meaning barakah, all right, and grace. So grace is also to be granted to those who are in the habit of reciting Quran. The last point is migrating for the sake of Allah. So whoever immigrates for the cause of Allah will find on the earth many alternative locations and abundance, as mentioned in the Quran. So we know that whoever has been, facing a lot of difficulties in one place should actually seek immigration, because God has placed ease and more doors to open. If we do that, provided that the condition is that we'll be doing this for the sake of God. It is not to, for example, it's not because you like that place more than you like your own, or because you want to, go sightseeing somewhere. These are different intentions. They're not bad at all. They're not haram. But again, doing this thing, which is immigrating, when it is done for the sake of God, right, it has a different kind of reaction, right? Or it's to be seen as a good deed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now comes the most profound part of our session, which is how do we live with this name, right? What should we do with this name? What does that belief in the name actually do to us? Now, the first thing is that it results in an internal contentment, something that no one would ever understand unless you actually experience. And you can see it at the time when a believer is put into test, a very hard test, and yet you see him from inside that he's content, that he hasn't doubted God, he hasn't blamed God, he hasn't even a decrease in his capacity of his belief. So knowing that God is provider should give us a sense of rida, which is contentment with what God has given us. And we can still strive for more. But our striving should be with gratitude for what we really already have, and without any resentment or bitterness towards God for what others have been given and what we have not been given. So Allah reminds us, and do not extend your eyes toward that by which we have given enjoyment of some categories of them, fits being by the splendor of worldly life by which we test them. And the provision of your Lord is better and more enduring, right? So this was one of the verses of the Quran that God has very clearly dictated that we should not be envious of others. We should not be, concentrating on what God has provided to other people and compare ourselves to them, because that would only lead to this kind of envy, which would then negatively impact our love and our relationship with God. God is doing whatever He's doing with hikmah, with wisdom. We need to believe in that, and we do not compare ourselves with others. Moreover, this act of contentment may also be the key that God has written to unlock the doors of our material provision. We should avoid being of the people whom Allah describes as there are also some who serve God with unsteady faith. And so if something good comes their way, they're satisfied. But if they are tested, they revert to their old ways, losing both this world and the next. That is the clearest loss. Very, very important words here, right? Showing us that we should not be putting God into test. We should not be, shaky or hesitant in our faith. We should have a steady and strong belief in Allah, and that would stand the test of time. Now, ethics in seeking provision. We should not seek provision through forbidden means, as we mentioned before, as that those prevents our supplications from being responded to by Allah, since God himself has made some of his provisions dependent on the effort, the means he had provided would never go against his own ruling. So the Prophet reminds us that the soul will never die until it finishes its term and consumes its provision. Thus be grateful, graceful in seeking provision, and let not one of you allow the delayed provision to compel him to seek it by disobedience. Verily, Allah does not grant what is with him but by obedience. That was one of the hadith, meaning words recited by the Prophet ﷺ. And in that hadith, we can see that we should not be, like seeking provision by all sorts and all ways, but except for those that are pleased by God or that are acceptable by God. Striving is, of course, as we mentioned before, it is one source of obtaining those provisions. So God has kept that knowledge hidden from us in order to ensure that we work hard regardless. So we should strive for our provision, both internal and external, knowing that God will give us what he has ordained for us and that he rewards us for our striving using permissible and ethical means. Another way is give from the sustenance that God has given. And so believing in this name would encourage you to be benevolent. So we may employ people to do work for us. For example, in that case, we should pay them promptly. That is their sustenance. And we should not deny people the provision. We need to remember that our provision is ultimately from God, no matter how seemingly hard we worked for it. It can therefore be a test for us when we hoard it and refuse to help others with it or give them what they are owed. So moreover, God Almighty says in the Quran, tell my servants who have believed to establish prayer and spend from what we have provided them secretly and publicly before a day comes in which they will know there will be no exchange nor any friendships. Provision is also spiritual provision. So if we can provide others with spiritual and emotional nourishment, we should do so. Al-Ghazali is one of the very well-known Muslim scholars, describes such people who have been given the means of sustenance for others as storehouses of God Most High, so that the one whose hand is made of a storehouse of sustenance for bodily sustenance, and his speech a storehouse of sustenance for the heart, has been honored with this attribute. Right? So it shows you how important it is. The last thing is ask God for good sustenance. We all want our provision to be from permissible and ethical sources, and we should ask God for that. One of the supplications of the Prophet was, "O Allah, indeed I ask you for beneficial knowledge and good provision actions which are acceptable."